The new third generation Audi RS3 arrived in Oz a few months ago with improved performance and a friskier chassis in its pitch to become the new king of the modern hyperhatch, and is hoping to steal the crown from this, the Mercedes-AMG A45 S, which many have considered to be the hottest small 5-door that you can buy ever since it arrived back in 2020. Figuring out which one's going to be the hottest is going to be, for at least one of us, a lot of fun. If you're in either of these cars for fair weather thrills, then we're going to have a result. But equally, if you're stumping up 91,400 for the Audi or a touch under 100 grand for the Mercedes-AMG, it's not unreasonable to expect that you might want to drive those every day. So which of this pair is the ultimate hyperhatch all-rounder? Well, there's only one way to sort that out, and it's on-road. So let's start with the Mercedes-AMG A45 S 4MATIC Plus, as it's officially called. And from the moment that you hit the start button and get moving, it's pretty plain that the little AMG means serious business. So let's start with the obvious area, engine. So the little 2-litre turbocharged 4 cranks out 310 kilowatts and 500 newton meters. Highly strung? Well, perhaps, but it doesn't actually feel like it on the march. In fact, its delivery is so linear and smooth that it hardly feels like it's breaking a sweat half the time. The engine has fantastic energy and it's a real sonic treat when you wind it out to redline. Back off and the exhaust just cracks like a snare drum. Nice. By the seat of the pants, the A45 feels wickedly quick, and part of that effect is the 8-speed dual clutch transmission. Like much of the rest of the package, the transmission is linear and precise, and you could use those two words to pretty much describe much of the driving experience. Take, for example, the steering. It's not overly sharp, but it's wonderfully measured and does offer pinpoint accuracy. Brakes are incredibly strong, and in the dry at least, the sheer grip seems almost unflappable. And this AMG rocket ship just feels light and responsive without ever feeling too wild or too loose. Sure, there's drift mode, but the A45 is already potentially way too quick when it's fully gripped up in a public forum. So far, so very impressive. So let's see how its rival from Audi compares. Right off the bat, the RS3 is rounder and a little less hard-edged than the AMG. It's a little more even and a little more measured in its manner, and a little more polite. But that's only by shades, because this Audi is downright fiery once you dig in. The RS3's 2.5-litre 5-cylinder is absolute dynamite, but deceptively so. At 294 kilowatts, it's actually 16 kilowatts down on the smaller AMG engine, though it does swing an equally large 500 newton meter torque stick. Better yet, it applies a bit more energy in the low to mid torque range, so you get better traction and thrust out of corner. Its signature 5-pot is just full of charisma. Now, it mightn't have quite the top end bark of the AMG engine, but really, the soundtrack of this thing is worth a big chunk of its heady investment. The Audi 7-speed DSG might be one cog down on the A45, but really, when you're having a bit of a go on the road, that makes no difference whatsoever. The transmission's slick on the march, though it's not quite rifle bolt slick like the AMG. The direction finder is quite excellent, though noticeably different to the A45. It's keener off center, and when you tuck into a corner and put load on the front axle, the counterweight is more genuine. But whether or not the Audi actually points or steers better than the AMG is really going to be down to personal preference. Like the AMG, the Audi gets drift mode for its all-wheel drive quattro system, but again, like its nemesis, you really have to drum up a road speed far too leery for a public forum to be able to tap into it. Of the two, the Audi is a little bit more dynamically benign, more planted in the rear and a little less enthusiastic to rotate through the corner with a throttle lift. But again, we're talking shades of difference here, and if anything to the Audi's advantage, it's a little bit more on rails when you're tipping it through a curve or changing direction. That said, this new third generation RS3 is certainly much livelier than its predecessors. However, it still demands the rather oddball tyre combination of 265s in the front and narrow 245s in the rear to really bring out that balance in the chassis. And the oddball rubber does work to a point. Push on, even on the road, and the Audi will err in the understeer at a kind of clip that the AMG won't. But realistically, the Audi just grips and goes, and much like the AMG, On road, you're only really scratching into its consummate talents at a sane pace. Still, the stopwatch doesn't lie. So we ran them against the clock to 100 kilometers an hour to let science sort out the performance verdict. Although they both launched really hard out of the blocks, it was the Audi that took the win, and by the slimmest margin imaginable. In isolation and on song, there's nothing soft or mild about the RS3 experience. But the Audi does offer impressive breadth of flexibility once you dial it down. Where the Audi really stakes its claim is in ride comfort. Even in its firmest dynamic mode, there's a real compliance to the damping. Better yet, its tempered nature across road bumps doesn't really seem to affect its body control or its ability to corner on rails. And it's still a stunningly capable handler when you drop down to auto or comfort mode. You can even dial the engine back to a very dull roar and it becomes quite placid in character. And yet there's still ample pep when called to action for overtaking or merging. There's a big downmark to its everyday credentials. It's that tyre roar can get quite deafening on coarse chip surfaces. Another grumble is the transmission. In bumper-to-bumper traffic, it can get flustered and jerky as the clutch packs do their thing. And that can get tiresome. So let's check out the AMG. Climbing back into the A45 from the RS3, and the AMG instantly feels racier and more hardwired to the driving experience, regardless of how hard you're actually driving it. The A45 also fits adaptive and selective damping, and while there is some compliance there, in its softer setting, it's about equal to the RS3's firmest. Worse still, its unforgiving nature thumps and fizzes over little imperfections and cat's eyes. The tyre roar is hellacious and it's louder than the RS3, and that can get quite fatiguing with long stints at the helm. That said, the wonderful 8-speed dual clutch is much smoother when it's confronted with stop-start peak hour grind. This gearbox really is remarkably polished. That manic engine is downright polite at a cruise, which makes it equally as impressive when you're just ticking along as when you have the right foot buried into the carpet. Thing is, it's quite thirsty. Even driven gingerly, it barely dips below double figures. The Audi's larger 5-cylinder with its extra low-end flexibility proves to be more frugal. Another annoyance is some of the active driver systems, such as the lane keeping, which is aggressive to the point of irritation. Sure, you can turn it off, but like cruise control and other features, it requires some familiarization because there's so much going on here in the cabin. From the column-mounted transmission controller to the thumb pads that adjust the content of the driver's screen, Mercedes-AMG and indeed Mercedes-Benz are bending over backwards to bring a unique in-cabin experience. And while some of it works, some of it doesn't. It's ostentatious and slick in here, but you get a sense that it's just for the sake of it. Some of the controls and switches are strange and not terribly intuitive, and they do require a bit of ownership investment to get your head around. Its overwrought and ornate nature is, however, AMG trying to justify spending $100,000 on a small hatchback. So the A45 is out to impress, and indeed it does that, particularly for some owner tastes. The screens are bright and sharp, and the materials are rich and tactile, which are all reminders that you've really invested into something that's premium. Ergonomically, it's fit for purpose. The seat, the wheel, the pedals, they're all where they should be for the heat of the battle. You do, however, need to pitch the seat base upwards for under-thigh support for those of us who have long legs. It drips a real boy and girl racer vibe, even if these racy seats don't offer quite the lateral support that their design suggests. So far so good, so let's see what it's like at the helm of the Audi. The Audi is arguably gaudier than the AMG because of all of the green highlights that match the paintwork, even here in the air vents. It's almost like the Audi is always shouting at you. But much like the AMG, it lays on the garnish to remind you that you've spent a bomb on a small hatchback, even if its look and feel is a bit more conventional. The seats are fancy, but not quite as fancy as the AMG, but they are comfier and do provide more lateral support when you are up it for the rent. Audi is, of course, renowned for its interior designs, and the look and execution is top-notch, particularly when it comes to materials, and the ergonomics are very sound. And while some of the angles are fancy in here, it's easier to negotiate than the AMG, and it's just generally more welcoming for the long haul. Let's face it, if outright practicality and roominess is really a priority, then you're kind of barking up the wrong tree, and you should be really looking towards things such as the RS4 and the C63. However, they're both well packaged and offer decent for adult accommodation. It doesn't take much seat time in either of these hardened competitors to realise that both are quicker and more exciting than you can possibly uncork on the road, and that you really need the white-knuckled expanse of a racetrack to really separate their ultimate capabilities. But on road, you're left with two distinctly different characters that are equally rewarding depending on your personal taste. Still, it's the AMG that nudges ahead as the most focused driver's tool of the pair. Its hardwired nature makes it racier no matter how hard you drive it. So if you're in it for pure heat, the AMG is your winner. Roll the credits. However, if you are after a finer all-rounder, then the Audi RS3 is your foil. Despite some ragged edges, you can generally live with it day to day without any hardship. And yet at a red hot clip, its capabilities are still well beyond what you can reasonably use on road. That's what I think, but how about you? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and while you're at it, don't forget to subscribe, and as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.